the comics programming in this room hand over F here at DragonCon, which means once the people that are coming here are decided, we decide what they're going to talk about. There's also the Comics and Popular Arts Conference at DragonCon. They present academic papers in this room in the comics track. They get submissions and they turn them into panels. I've been doing this for 2 years, so I'm going to give you a little bit of background on how this panel and the one after it came to be. So last year, it's my first year doing it. Would see the academic panels, would enjoy them greatly, great discussion, great thoughts. Would see the fan panels and guest panels also, great discussions, great thoughts. Sometimes there was some overlap in the subject matter, and without fail, it was usually from one pole to the other, the opinions expressed, the academic panels versus the traditional comics panels. Not a bad thing. So I said, in the great comics tradition, let's do a crossover. And so, for the first time, to my knowledge, we have a panel mixing both. And I've introduced myself. I also am a comics retailer. I have been for 10 years. I've been a black person for 41 years. I'm passionate about diversity and inclusion and representation in comics because it's something that I've been wrestling with as long as I've been a comics fan. And I'm happy to see those type of issues finally coming to the forefront. And I say to the forefront because they've always been there, but people just haven't really been talking about them. So as I said, this is not actually an academic panel. You won't see the type of intellectual fireworks that happen at a CPAC panel. We're handling it from... That was not sarcastic.
Oh, yeah. That's like...
Sorry, I thought that was a compliment. Yeah, I know. That's what I'm saying. You get the no prize because you recognize that reference. So anyway, we are going to handle this, for lack of a better word, from the ass end of it, from the fan aspect of it. Where these issues kind of get worked out in the real world. Because a lot of times those type of concepts, that language, it comes from the academic realm and it kind of works its way to push society forward. Sometimes people are lagging behind, sometimes people are pulled kicking and screaming, sometimes people run out ahead of it not knowing what they're doing or what they're trying to represent. And then people become passionate, they become emotional. So I felt like it was time, at least in the context of for both sides to have their feet put to the fire, so to say. Maybe that will happen, maybe it won't, but now I'm going to sit back and let everyone introduce themselves and we can go straight into the questions. And like I said, this is coming from a fan perspective, diversity and sexuality in comics. You know, in the books, in the stores. We won't get into the greater issue of fandom because that's the next panel. I mean, that might happen. I'll try to direct it back if it does. So we're dealing specifically with comics, and I'm going to let everybody introduce themselves. I'm going to shut up now.
Are you clapping because you didn't want to shut up?
It's working? Yes.
Just kidding.
Pardon my voice. I got the con credit. My name's Allie. I work here at DragonCon in videography. I produce and co-host the DragonCon Late Show every morning. I don't know if any of you all watch that. It's okay if you don't. I've been a lifelong comic book fan, and I only just recently came back to comic books in the last maybe 3 years after about 5 years away because of some of the issues we'll probably touch on here.
My name is Johnathan Flowers. I am a PhD candidate at Southern Illinois University, Carbondale. I work in the area. Yeah, right. So I work in the areas of race, gender, sexuality, and Japanese aesthetics. I'm writing my dissertation on the application of Japanese aesthetics to gender. I'm also writing a book chapter called Is It Okay to Be a Black Nerd, which explores the black community's articulation of nerddom and the missing narrative of the black female nerd. So that's me.
I'm Josh Trujillo. I'm a queer comic book creator based out of Los Angeles. This summer, I don't know. I've had stories through Northwest Press and Archaea. I do a romance anthology called Love Machines, and earlier this summer I hosted San Diego Comic-Con's first diversity and queer gaming panel.
My name is Afua, Richardson. I'm a comic book illustrator. I work for DC, Marvel, Top Cow, Dark Horse, Universe. I'm also a singer, songwriter, flute player, bass player, activist, voice actor, and I occasionally do box.
Can you hear me if I talk like this? Yes. If at some point you can't hear me, just do like Kermit arms and all. My name is Amrhein. I'm an independent scholar. I study comics, art history background, and intersectional studies are kind of my areas of focus. You can find me online at journeytoawesome.com, where I write primarily about issues of race, gender, sexuality, all the stuff we're talking about.
So I'm going to float the first unofficial question to the panel. What would you say is the state of diversity and sexuality in comics right now? In your opinion?
Let's just hop in.
I think it really depends on if you're talking about like the big two or independent comics. I think Image is doing better, or at least Image titles I've been reading have been doing a better job at being more inclusive. But I think the big two kind of they're getting better, but it's not not quite I guess where I'd like it to be. I don't know. I know I've been feeling a lot of frustration personally as a bi woman about how my sexuality's been handled, because it's kind of like DC came out recently with, oh, Catwoman's bisexual, and I'm kind of like, is this, what's their motivation in this? Are they actually trying to be inclusive and have more bi representation? Are they doing this? Yeah, I know. Are they doing this because, straight boys think that's hot?
So how many of you were here yesterday? So you probably heard this before. Yeah, no, I don't think it's getting better, but it's getting better in ways that are often problematic. So the Catwoman thing is a pretty good example. But when we start talking about diversity, we often keep thinking about it in terms of race and not in terms of something like disability, which is the other area that I work in. So when we're talking about diversity, I'd say it's getting better by inches, right? So you have more characters of color, more queer characters, but the way that some of these characters are represented is not does not align with the experience of people reading these books, and is often kind of hurtful to people reading these books. And so yeah, I'd say it's getting better by inches, but it has a whole lot of work to do, especially in the area of representation of people with disabilities, particularly the the way in which comics do things like, well, if you have a disability, you either get superpowers, you're cursed with suck, or you either get superpowers, you're cursed with suck, or it's something that can be fixed, which is not at all what the lived experience of people with disabilities is.
I feel like it's like visibility has increased in the past year especially, but I feel like that's more of a trend than maybe a lasting imprint. And there's a lot of stuff that's coming out from Marvel and DC that have maybe gay characters, bi characters of color, but they're still being written by that hetero white guy, that figure. I mean, even Marvel did those, I'm sure we'll talk about this to death, but like that hip-hop variant month cover, where it's like, I don't think they had a single artist of color working on them, which is amazing that they were even able to find all those white people that knew like all these hip-hop covers.
Google hip-hop. I got two words that describes that, cultural appropriation.
Right. That's kind of like Marvel's thing too, like they did, like, they stole like a bunch of, Kung Fu was big in the 70s, and they took a bunch of that. Blaxploitation was big in the 70s, so they did a bunch of that. Then disco, then dancing, like, they keep just like, they're almost getting it, but it still doesn't seem clear, especially if you look at the sales and like the long-term plan. Like their bread and butter is still the same white guys kind of abusing women and doing that thing.
Well, I actually just finished one of those X-Men hip-hop covers. It's totally fine. I totally understand. From the outside looking in, it seems like the same old hats, the same old tricks, but we also have to understand the context. Look at the staff. 20 years ago, there were not a lot of women. Joe Quesada becoming chief creative officer, I think like 15 years ago maybe. He was the first person in that position who was an artist. So think about that. A person who's running Marvel Comics, not being an artist. The decisions being made creatively, the decisions being made for these books, not being made by those who love this stuff. You know what I mean? Like when I was a kid, I had more comics than clothes. And the last panel, I was talking about my first day of kindergarten, and a friend of mine just recently reminded me of our first conversation. He says, "Hi, my name's Johnathan," and I say, "I can shoot my nails out." So, I mean, comics is not really surprising, but Marvel and DC, they've had the same characters for how many years now? These characters are old. 75 years, and we're looking to them to tell our stories. They're telling the stories of the time. Those creators made those characters for the time. Now they're changing, and it's like a 75-year-old at a rate. Might not fit.
Which I think I saw last night.
It's DragonCon. Magical things happen. But now independent comics are kind of plowing forward, and different kinds of creators are making their way through. And I think it sort of seems contrived because, of course, it's like, oh yeah, now you're going to make hip-hop covers, really? But look at hip-hop then. Look at hip-hop in the 80s and 90s. Method Man called himself Johnny Storm. Johnny Blaze, excuse me, I'm tired. But he called himself Johnny Blaze. What, Ghostface Killer got sued for calling himself Iron Man and taking a sample from the movie? There's been a crossover for a really long time, and Axel Alonso, who is Latino, but somehow that's erased. It's like he's white. Your culture is erased if you're white. That doesn't matter. Like all those things get thrown on top of it. And of course, it's a mixed bag. But just kind of playing devil's advocate, like we had a conversation.
White devil's advocate.
I like that we're having these conversations because they need to happen. There's a lot of healing art is the thing to do it. You know, like we love these characters, dress up as these characters, we make these characters, we identify with these characters, and it's time for us to make new ones because we have new stories, and you know, they're, gosh, I think maybe in the last 5 years, the female staff at Marvel has increased 30%. So you're going to see changes as the creators are changing. I think Joe Quesada was the first Latino in the upper echelon. So that's like, man, they're different chefs in the kitchen. So we're getting more than burgers and fries right now. They're trying. It's going to take a while. They're going to get it wrong. But it's going to be up to us to tell our own stories. That's his story, not the story. So you're going to see changes. It's going to be slow. But so are humans. Okay, I'm done. Sorry.
Follow that up. Okay. Question of how is diversity in comics? There are a few standouts that are really getting it right, but overall, they're kind of the islands in the sea of mediocrity, if I'm being generous. There, you know, I can think of, for every really positive example I can think of one extremely negative example, and then the rest of it are just a bunch of straight white guys running around in spandex punching each other. You know, I appreciate some of the steps being made. I don't have a problem with the hip-hop cover. I know that there's this really beautiful connection, like you said. You know, and there are even more rap artists that use, or you know, hip-hop artists you have Jing Ray, MF Dude, you know, you have a lot of really great talented, a lot of really great talented hip-hop artists who are influenced by comics, and it does make sense that they would be natural allies. Both are art forms that kind of came out of we can do this really cheap. You know, comics are really inexpensive to make, especially nowadays. You know, with the internet and everything, and then the same thing with with hip hop. And I think that some of the earlier comics, when they were largely power fantasies of Jewish men in the 1940s in New York, you know, superhero comics especially have that kind of ingrained in them. So I think that they could be naturalized. My only issue was that it was a bunch of white guys capitalizing on another culture's art without bringing in enough members of that culture.
There's Sanford Ewing, forgive me if I mispronounce his name, I assume, I counted at least 15.
We can't hear you.
Oh, I counted at least 15. There was like, I looked, I was like, all right, before I make assumptions, let me take a look, let me count it, and see who's there. There were 2 Asian, one Middle Eastern, maybe about 5 or 6 different black guys, and a lot of different combinations. Brian Stelfreeze, he's amazing, he's here, and I feel like hip-hop at this point is kind of universal. And I totally understand, like, but I also feel like, just like tennis is not something that is a white sport, and anyone can do it, does it, and is willing to dedicate themselves to it. Hip-hop is one of those things that is expressed worldwide now. And it's kind of weird with the timing with Straight Outta Compton, which I don't want to offend anybody, but I don't think you can see that. It's a little comical to me. It's like, but the artist whose covers they did got paid. They got paid, and they loved it. They're like Nas. I don't know if it loved it, but Tribe Called Quest, De La Soul. It's a reintroduction of the they pay the artist for it? Yes. Did they pay the recording artist for it? Yes. Did they pay the label for it? Yep. So people got paid. Are they, I don't even know if they're going to sell the covers on the comics themselves. They might be variants. So
Yeah,
it's,
they are. They have to order it. I think it's probably 50 up there.
yeah, and they're pretty expensive. So they're paying. They're paying out of the wazoo to have the right to do it. Is it cultural appropriation? One might be able to argue that, but I think if, as a classical flute player, am I appropriating European culture? No. I enjoy it. I love it. Do they love it? I don't know. I can't pretend to know. And I can't make an assumption. All I can do is like challenge them at their work. Will you pay artists? Will you bring in artists of color? We all do color, by the way. None of us are transparent. And right? Unless you are transparent. Anyway, like I feel like the big two have their feet to the fire. What's that? The big two have their feet to the fire right now, and they're going to have to change with the times or sink.
Okay, we have one question already.
It actually is I'm looking at this, we've been focusing a lot on the hip hop cover, I think the first kind of decisive thing for the group. But looking at that from the other side of things, not so much from bringing elements of hip hop into comics, but, because as you all noted that in some way, shape, or form, that intersection is almost always like the Wu-Tang Clan stop themselves as superhero group. Like that's what they were. They were the X-Men, they were the Avengers, they were just, they were the Avengers and ninjas and the 36 chambers. Like they were like sticks with swords, killer bees. But before I get too far down that one. Bringing it from the other element, I mean, to the other direction, you've got people who are more and more, I think of Adam Warren, he's Asian American, doing hip hop, bringing elements of comics, like, and I can't even say elements, he raps about comics, like that's what he does.
Yeah.
That's pretty much all he raps about. I mean, he takes his name from comic. He has an entire like EP that's basically just a mashup of Watch the Throne with X-Men themes. Right? This is what he does. So that conversation, I think, is an interesting one when we're talking about the possibility of not so much cultural appropriation, but a theme, an idea that was brought up on the panel yesterday, reappropriation, of taking it from the other direction of saying this is a thing that has been empowering to me as a reader of comics for a long time. This is a thing that I've drawn strength from, and I'm going to reframe it and reshape it in a way that actually does something for me as a reader, as an experiencer of this thing. And I wanted to know what the panel thinks about that, not just the music, but throughout culture, throughout comics fans, and throughout comics.
Reappropriation, at least, if we're talking about reappropriation, at least in its the normal way it's used, only works on a negative stereotype. So you reappropriate, like, forgive my language, but bad bitch, right? You reappropriate that and turn it into a positive element. So to say that you're reappropriating hip hop culture for the use of comics is to say that hip hop culture is inherently negative and therefore you need to give it a positive spin. Now, the only way you can sell that is if you had a kind of structure that told you hip hop, wait, we do, don't we? Yeah. If you had a kind of structure that said hip hop is the product of, or it's something, hip hop is inherently bad, that kind of thing. So I wouldn't, if we were going to make the argument that that the collusion there is, a kind of representation of something positive, we wouldn't call it a reappropriation because then that would assume that one or more of the elements is negative. And in my mind, neither of those elements are negative. Now, both comics and hip hop have some deep, deep problems in them. And you can reappropriate the comic form to do something positive, e.g. March. John Lewis and his wonderful team put that together. Or you could do it in ways that are somewhat shallow, e.g. X-Men. But the fact stands that if you want to talk about reappropriation in that vein, one or more of those elements has to be negative, and while they both have unfortunate elements to them, I don't think they're both inherently bad, unless I'm missing the thrust of your question.
Not to entirely. I wanted to follow up. Not so much. I would say that it doesn't necessarily mean the thing itself to be inherently negative, but of course to be used by some members of the culture as inherently negative. And I think that mode does exist for both comics and for hip hop. The culture, as you were saying, use it as the product of, an unsavory element in the form of when it comes to nature hip hop, but when it comes to being, marginalized in other ways, when it comes to comics as a whole, that it might not be actually negative, but that there is an element of wider culture, the wider structures surrounding it that use it.
Well, yeah, because comics are a product of society to reflect as works of art societal values. So.
Yeah, cool. Walking through the art gallery today, and you notice a lot of stuff that could be read as kind of objectifying, kind of misogynistic. The pinups and the stuff, which a lot of us in the room, I'm sure we like that to a degree. It's interesting, it's well made and all that, but again, it can be read that way. My question is, do we put the sort of onus for putting that out there on the companies, for putting that out because it sells, to cisgendered white dude? Or do we put that more on the fans for continuing to consume it to such a degree without putting up any great stink over it? Yeah, thank you. We're all here in this room talking about it, but there's still several thousand people out there doing their thing, so where do we go from there?
Okay, so this is something I was actually discussing with my girlfriend who's back here while we were walking through Artist Alley, and that how we look at that pinup art and, we can stand there all day and break down why this is sexist or misogynistic, but also as, queer women, it's kind of nice to look at. Because, everyone is multifaceted. You can be intellectual and a little shallow too. But also, I don't know if it's fair to sit there and, tell the fans, oh, it's your fault for continuing to consume this. Because our choices as fans are sometimes, limited. And I know growing up reading comics as a girl, comics haven't always been very friendly to women, and so I would get all these awesome high-adventure superhero stories, but with women wearing a lot less clothes than their male counterparts, and posed in cheesecake poses and everything, and so I don't know. I don't know how much of my enjoyment of that is my own and how much of it's conditioned, and it's complicated. And I do think that that there should be a push for creators to do better with how they're drawing women in comics. But at the same time, like I said, sometimes it's fun to look at. So
I would say it's kind of circular. It's kind of a chicken and egg scenario. Art helps define culture, but culture helps define art. One is a product of the other. We can't really divorce either one. You can't understand a culture without looking at their art. You can't understand an art piece of art without looking at their culture. So we can't really say, oh, shame on you, X point in this circle, this is where everything went wrong. I think it's a symptom of a larger issue. sexy individuals in movies, the depictions thereof. You can make a body, you can create a body, a form that is sexy without being objectified. I think some of the women that you draw are incredibly sexy, but they're not all like presenting at me either, and breaking their spines into and like splayed open. There are plenty of good examples of sexy art that is okay and could even be empowering in the right context. But I definitely think that that's an important distinction to be made. And I know I just kind of talked all around your question from every angle.
I'll say that this is like maybe a new, I don't know if it's a trend or just a new area of comics, but there's always been an appreciation of the human/male form in comics. I mean, that's why Wortham got so, his hands tied about Batman and Robin way back when. And so now there's a lot of kind of male cheesecake art, either for the female reader or for the gay reader. And there's a big celebration of that in like the LGBTQAI plus movement. So within that, there's a big celebration. We did it. We got really sexy dudes. You got books like Grayson and Midnighter that really kind of celebrate the male form and kind of play with that that gay bi that mentality. And I don't know. I mean, that's a victory on some level, but it's still kind of objectifying males. It's not really fixing the problem. It's just making that kind of objectification available to different readers.
I'm gonna drive right at the question with like a big truck. Something Josh said. You said that it allows men to be objectified, and I want to change that around, right? If you can objectify the male form, but it doesn't have the same kind of social consequences that objectification of the female form does. What you're talking about is the expansion of the class of individuals who can say engage in like oppressive activity like objectification. So like I think that speaks to some of your problem with the queer celebration of yeah, we've got male beefcake, that kind of thing. Yeah. Right? You're expanding the class of individuals who can engage in forms of oppression instead of like actually transforming something. So here's where I drive that thing with the truck. So when we're talking about sexy, objectified bodies, we're generally talking about bodies that fall within a narrow spectrum, right? And so while we can, talk around the empowerment of, or whose fault it is, right? What we're really talking about is the way in which comics generate a cultural narrative or reproduce a cultural narrative of what is sexy, what should be sexy, what should be considered attractive. And like Dan said, you can create sexy works of art that aren't objectified, but invariably when we do so, we tend to do so in the mode of particular body types. And so if we're going to talk about objectification and sexualization, we need to talk about the way in which certain bodies are appropriate to be objectified and sexualized, and how other bodies carry that with them inherently.
I think the creators are changing too. I think the avenue of independent creators are opening up, so different kinds of stories are being told. And it takes, as independent creators creating comics without the ginormous funding of the big two, it takes a lot more, and it takes a lot more marketing and effort, but there are things like Kickstarter, so people, and Image Comics are changing. It's changing these avenues. It's kind of like the internet to music, whereas, we were stuck with the radio and those same 10 songs played over and over again. Now you can go online and get them all. And if we want to see something different, we have to support something different financially. We keep going to the same avenues and looking to Marvel and DC, like parents, please, the government, please fix all of our problems. They're going to do what they can, but they're still using the same characters. So DC has vertigo in which to allow their independent stories to flourish. But I don't know if Marvel has that same.
Marvel has had icon.
Right.
But you will find smaller publishers like Valiant that are embracing different body types in a smaller degree, and Kickstarter especially, I think, if you add up all the money, Kickstarter is the third largest publisher, and that's just 1,000 people trying to tell their story. So
See, my thing is that to a smaller degree, right? Because it's, not to go off on a tangent, but like it's good that we have, it's good that we have the independent publishers and the Kickstarter and the other stuff, but independent publishers tend not to have the same kind of visibility that the big two do and the other larger publishers. So, for example, if one of the big two gave us a positive body representation of a woman, right, that wasn't like a pinup or something like that, and treated her as a superhero and not like a monster or something like that, that would be a great bet. And I don't mean to like demean the work of the independent artist. No, not at all. But like I would love to see the big two like literally take up some of the stuff that these independent, like hire them to create the stories, because part of it is not just having the people making it; it's having the visibility of those stories.
To speak to that your wish has been happening probably for the past 7 to 10 years. That's why this shift is happening now. It probably started with Bendis. Bendis at Big Two. So Bendis begats Miller, begats Hickman, like that. And because they have a different sensibility, they can start to push that envelope farther in that corporate comic realm, which is also why panels like this are happening now. So I agree with that, but I think it's already happening, and maybe it's time for, since that has already happened, what have you done now that you've come into that realm with that sensibility? How much have you pushed it?
Gail Simone said something about women in refrigerators in comics, that being the motivation for lots of male superheroes to go and do what they do. And I was thinking about the female superhero and like violence against women within comic books. And I was thinking about recovery time for female superheroes like Barbara Gordon in the New 52 as Batgirl, and how it's like it started off as her recovering from that, with the Joker and Death and Family stuff. Whatever it is. Anyway, I was wondering about stuff like that. What you guys think about when female superheroes get injured? Do you feel that there is a huge difference between when they get back on their feet, as it were, rather than versus when male superheroes do? Because when male superheroes get hurt, like Batman, shit, he's back on his feet tomorrow night. But then you've got like Barbara Gordon or like Power Girl, when they get hurt, it takes 8 issues for them to recover, and that's the storyline. And how do you feel about that, and what can be done? Like it just feels like it's victimizing the superhero even further, the female superhero.
I know it's so difficult to say because there's so many different universes and timelines and writers and creatives who have their hands in the narrative of these various superheroes. And like when Batman broke his back, I don't know. I think it's changing a little bit. A little. I see what you're saying. Like, I was like, man, all right, next issue. Broken leg, arm, shot, face. Because he's super.
And another thing you have to look at is they're only going to focus on those things which work in the service of the story.
Right.
And on a macro level, the story is going to ultimately serve the bottom line.
Right.
So, I mean, you have all those factors feeding into like a long history of, weird depowerings and strange situations situation for female superheroes?
I want to circle back to using Barbara Gordon as an example, because like what you had said about disabled bodies being presented as something needing to be fixed, the fact that when the New 52 started, she's not Oracle anymore. And
Right.
the thing about Oracle is it took that awful, horrible, sexist, sexualized violence from the Killing Joke and was kind of able to, I guess when we talk about reappropriation, taking that very negative thing and turning her into Oracle, who's, you know, Batman's eye in the sky. He, you know, couldn't do what he does without her, and she became a very important character to fans with disabilities, to fans who have to use wheelchairs, because here's this amazing, intelligent, very capable character who is in a wheelchair. And then DC just kind of put that away.
And she's still a pretty, she's still a pretty badass martial artist as Oracle. Like I have a, not to get too much on a tangent, I have a friend of mine who took up Kali Eskrima, the stick fighting, because he saw Oracle do it. And he's in a wheelchair.
And I guess that was also a part of the issue too, because Gail Simone she wrote Birds of Prey, and that was sort of a part of her story, that this is how she operates now. So now with the change, and now, you know, even though I hadn't followed it as much, the consideration of her injuries being sustained and now being a part of the story might also have something to do with how long it's taken for her to recover. I can't speak to her because I haven't read it just because I'm protesting the boob window.
So, Batman broke his back, and he was unable to do his Batman thing. And then we got Azrael, and John Paul Valley has interesting psychological issues which weren't handled very well at all. We'll leave it at that. And then Batman's back got fixed through something. I'm not quite sure how it happened, but his back got fixed. Right, no, that's a good example, because both of those actions happened in service of a driving narrative. Only one of those actions happened in service of the primary character's narrative. Batgirl's paralyzation, while it was extremely sexualized, and it took an entirely new writing staff to reappropriate that action to turn it into something that was valuable for her characterization. Batgirl's her becoming paralyzed was done completely in service of Bruce Wayne's man pain, which is an extremely big problem with that, especially when we're talking about recovery time. Because it was done in service of Batman's man pain, she was never going to recover, because he always needed that reminder of what the Joker had done. And then we got New 52.
So there's the disability issue, but then this also goes back to objectification, which we were talking about before. So there's sexual objectification, which is literally treating a woman like a sexy object, and then there's just objectification, treating her like an object or a prop. You mentioned some of the gay male gaze on some of the characters, like Grayson and stuff like that, which is great because Grayson's still an independent character that is treated as a character of agency. So I would say that that's objectification. I would just say that that's a little bit of sexy man candy, which is fine because
That doesn't point to his character as being sexy.
he's sexy. Yeah, exactly. So that's okay with me because he's not being objectified. There's a difference when you have a just sexy background character for eye candy, and that's her purpose in the story. The same thing if you're talking about violence against women in the story. Is the story that, is it a Barbara Gordon story where she is being physical and, she's having violence come at her in the same way that, it would come against Batman, or is she just being injured to service a male protagonist? You know, that's kind of where the like fridging women comes from. It's another form of objectification. It's treating women as a as a problem, as a commodity. It's not a sexual commodity unless it is sexualized violence against women. Then we have all kinds of horrible stuff going on. But I think that that's an important distinction to make. You can hurt a male or female character, or any gender. I'm sorry, I shouldn't limit it. Still working personal journey. But so I think that absolutely, put some of the characters in the ringer. Just make sure it's about that character. Don't just keep whacking off women just left and right, just killing them to just so that the men can get angry in a movie and have some sort of connection to the villain that hurt them. You know what I'm saying? That's where the issue kind of comes in.
And a lot of Gail Simone's career as a writer, a lot of her strength, I think, is kind of fixing some of the damage that previous male writers had done to important female characters. And there's a whole list now. We're talking Black Canary lost her superpowers in the 80s, Huntress, which is a really confusing mess before she took over as Birthday Plan. Tora Ice from the Justice League International was killed in a really gruesome way. Sue Digney died, and she's, spoiler alert, she's back again. Like we're finally getting to this point where I guess female writers are kind of undoing the damage of the past, and that's really interesting. That they're creating that as part of those characters' narrative, that they are survivors, that they are tenacious, and kind of their resilience.
That's reappropriation right there.
Nelson, anyone ever notice that terrible things happen to Robin and nobody gives a shit? Poor Robin.
Okay, I'll get back to you. I'm gonna take one more question from this side of the room, and then a lot of people over here have been waiting too. So, what was your question?
I was going to ask about like the influx of titles like Samuel from Captain America, the new Miss Marvel. She deals a lot with also not only having superpowers as a 16-year-old girl, but also with her family life and her religion. It's very foreign knowledge with her and her family, and also the new Thor, which deals a lot with her trying to prove herself. And since the Thor has basically always been this kind of male power fantasy, and her trying to prove herself to others to be able to take on that power. And so do you think that the popularity of Thor has been pretty popular? Do you think that these will hopefully open doors for other titles like this to come and show that we do want diversity in comics?
I think as people
Like the whole panel happy. We're all
yes, we all set up in our chairs. I think as people buy what is being made that they want to see, then more money will be funneled into those kinds of comics. As these are very, very powerful archetypes that go beyond them. I mean, Grant Morrison speaks about it all the time. Superman is like Jesus, Batman is like Hades. Like these are old archetypes that speak to us like in our DNA, and they're being changed, and these are our gods. These are our new gods. These are our new icons. And when we make these idols and they dictate our ideas of beauty, of heroism, of sexuality, I think where it goes astray is when these ideas are pasted onto a character and it doesn't fit. When a character is in like a bikini and they themselves are not a seductress, because those characters exist. Like Red Sonja, she doesn't do couth. She knows that she's in a metal bikini and that's a distraction to, or like, I'm gonna hesitate while I swing this axe. Perfect, I'm chopping off your head. That fits, because that is who she is. But if you have like a small me, which is also powerful, and that character exists too, and she can be strong even if she can't like do a push-up. If she's wearing something that doesn't fit the character, then that's objectification. That's putting something on someone that doesn't fit. and then propping them up to be this thing to, ooh, I'm like, oh my god, yeah, she has like ice cream boobs. That's, I mean, it's not real, it's not realistic, and then people think, oh my god, I'm not sexy because I don't have ice cream scoop boobs. Or, you know, women who are very voluptuous feel like, oh, well, I can't wear this really, really, you know, sexy dress without being thought of as a skank. You know, no, like, if that, unapologetic, create these characters, and but be truthful, be true to who they are. If they're a burlesque dancing, axe swinging, you know, super gal, if that's who she is, then let that be who she is. If they're queer and they don't have any superpowers and they just are who they are and they have a story that we identify with, let that story be told. And it's up to the creators to make what we want to see. We have to be that show. We have to make those things happen if we want to see and support it, because that's the way we'll get our stories told. We can't say, hey, this person over here changed. I mean, we can't. We can't. We demand it and they'll buy it, but to expect someone else to tell what's on your heart and get it right, we might be disappointed.
That's actually really why I mean, so you asked the question about legacy characters being portrayed by people of color or people that are traditionally portrayed. Okay, so Miss Marvel is a really good example because that is a book being, as Afua said, being told. It's a story being told by the people who live that story, right? And that is why Miss Marvel is so incredibly powerful. The same thing I really hope is going to happen with Amadeus Cho as the Hulk. How many of you were on the internet within the past 24 hours and saw that? Yeah, Amadeus Cho as the Hulk. And that is really important because the way in which we construct Asian men in generally American society is meek. They don't get angry, they're very weak, etc., etc. No, they just threw all that out by making him the Hulk. We have reconstructed the dominant narrative, at least in the comics, of what an Asian American man is, and that is super important. And that is pretty much why I am not really anybody who starts up with the, well, you have changed a legacy character into something I don't recognize because you have switched the gender, the race, the sexuality, ethnicity. I tend to say, so what? Because these characters they represent something. Cap stands for something. He's the guy who says, you know, plant yourself next to a river like the tree of truth and say, no, you move, right? And to have a black man saying that means something, right? To have Miss Marvel be, you know, a Muslim and wrestle with those kinds of issues means something, and it means something for all of us who read it because we get a glimpse into that lived experience through the narrative, through the work of art, and that's why those things, I am completely on board with them, totally okay with those things so long as they're done with kind of tastefully and under the hand of somebody who knows what they're doing. And Thor is actually, not to keep going on this, but I actually almost like the female Thor more than some of these other transformations because Thor's power is not something that, you know, is inherent in him. It's something he has to be worthy of. And while we have seen like Storm move Mjolnir or the facsimile thereof that Loki made, yeah, I know that history. To have a woman carry Thor's hammer, for her to be worthy, right, says something about, you know, women. It says something that we've all needed to hear out of comics for a long, 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 long time, right? For that to be, she is worthy, right?
Well, with Thor, that new Thor, there's an illness narrative to it. There's a subtext of that she's dying, but she still has that strength. She's not less than because she has this disease. I think that's really powerful too. I'm kind of interested to see how that unfolds over the course of the story.
I really hope that, you know, the power of Mjolnir, because if you recall, Jane Foster refused Asgardian help with her illness. I really hope that the power of Thor doesn't simply annihilate her illness, and that the narrative deals concretely with it. If it doesn't, then it's reproducing those same kind of issues that I was talking about with regards to disability.
There's also this idea of like heroic male suffering, where you get those panels of just whatever character taking slug after slug, and Batman just covered in blood,
It's
just
so
keeps
heavy.
going, and Spider-Man like when women are hurt, it's like, oh no, I have to go save her. This is like a nice kind of reversal of that, at least in that it's a woman going through this horrible hardship, and this is her like collapsed subway tunnel. You know what I mean? She is suffering heroically, and it seems unstoppable despite all of that. I think that that's really interesting and important for women to be shown in that light.
It's also kind of providing a mirror. Here is an example of heroic iconography. You can be just brave enough to be heroic in real life. It's like we create these archetypes to what end? To be entertained? It's great. It's great to lose yourself in a story, but then we come back to reality, and then what do? What happens? How does that translate into our real lives? So having examples of different kinds of heroes, I mean, if someone wants to change an icon and change the face of it, that's cool. We can also make new heroes too. I don't really have a problem with either, because it's not American. Let's say I made a character, they looked a particular way, and in 50 years someone was angry at me because it looked a certain way. I don't know, I can kind of understand what Stanley was getting at, but at the same time, I was super excited when I found out that Falcon was going to be Captain America. The idea of that's like, Boris is Captain America. That's amazing. Just to see it. Why is it so powerful? Why is it something that really strikes us? Because it's changing the iconography. Like, a lot of people's muses are sick, and the idea of what masculinity is, what femininity is, has been obscured by those who will have us buy things because we're told we're not enough. Like, you have to buy these products, these sort of subtle threats. You're not good enough if you're this weight. You're not beautiful. You're not sexy if you're plus size. You just are who you are, and it's amazing. And I'm excited that these things are changing in comics, and I'm gonna make them. I'm gonna make them, like, as I have the opportunity to, and as I have the chance to. All these things that we're talking about, let's just make them. And those of you out there who create, we need your stories. It's medicine. It really is, because there are too many people who make things just for the money. But your story, like hearing you survive, hearing you, why, like you said, why is this Marvel so powerful? Because someone lived it, and then they survived. It provides a narrative for someone to know, yes, I'm struggling, I'm holding up a subway tunnel, or maybe my family, and I can be heroic because they're heroic. I found resolution in this narrative of fiction, and now, you know what, fucking super. I can do this,
You mentioned X-Men earlier, which I think is one of the more interesting examples. Way earlier, I've had my question held since your first statement. But it's one of the more interesting examples because when Stanley was interviewed at one point, he said it was a very, 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 very obvious allegory to the civil rights movement and to the fight that was happening. And you were very offended at what it was. And I also wanted to bring up queer coding as for villains and the prevalence of smart women being villains and how do you think that comics and TV, do you think TV progressing faster? There's a lot of data in here right now.
No worries.
Do you think that TV is progressing faster on diversity than comics due to shows like Arrow and The Flash on the CW, which are bringing forth more female heroes that aren't being put in fridges, and female scientists that aren't villains? They're still working on not white people, but
Iris is awesome.
I know she is. I like her. She's like my favorite. She's awesome. But this whole idea of how comics that should traditionally be progressing are not, or are doing it the wrong way, and how comics that aren't normally traditionally progressive kind of are getting pushed forward by the audience. Because let's be real, CW is not pushed forward by like a bunch of big names. It's pushed forward by people who just want to spend money on lots of attractive people.
So, the X-Men, I'm aware of the Stan Lee quote about the X-Men as an allegory for the civil rights movement, but it is still an allegory created by a white dude who's got a cultural history, a cultural understanding of it provided by other white dudes, which results in a kind of re-perpetuation of a single image of what the civil rights movement ideally, or looks like, right? So if Dwayne McDuffie, I think I'm saying his name wrong, but right, yeah, if he had made the X-Men, you'd have a very different X-Men, right? You wouldn't have Professor X saying, in the initial X-Men run saying, no, hide your mutations from the rest of society, wear costumes, blah, 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 so on and so forth. You'd probably have something like, the X-Men marching through the streets, still righting wrongs, but doing so in a very visible, we're doing this, we deserve, equal treatment kind of way. And there's a whole bunch of horrible things I could say about X-Men. The poor Martin Malcolm comparison between Professor X and Magneto, the way that Bishop, when introduced, was literally a character whose power was, I get hit hard, I generate power, I use that as an attack, and there are whole battles in that section of X-Men where the battle is won by Cyclops literally just blasting his optic blast into Bishop's back, and then Bishop just blasting that outwards. Not to push a metaphor too far, but he is beating the man to make him do his work. And it's not something you can really think about too hard, but so there is my issue with X-Men, not to mention the way in which X-Men treats disabilities. So right, you have characters whose superpowers constitute disabilities. I'm sorry, I'm taking so you have characters whose powers would constitute disabilities, and they will either, again, they fall into those three things. You get superpowers, you're cursed with suck, or you're a monster. Or they fix you. Sorry, that's the third one, they fix you. Some people are fixed by providing limiters for their powers. Cyclops is Ruby Quartz Visor as an example. Some people's mutations, while debilitating, become a source of extreme strength. They get superpowers, and then you have all of the mutants and Ultimate X-Men does this really horribly, right? All the mutants whose mutations are physical deformities are locked away in an island with Moira McTaggart to keep them ostensibly for medicalization or to keep them alive. But really, what you're doing is you're sequestering anybody who doesn't look normal. Right? And then there's that entire issue with Professor X and her son, where he kind of he has some emotional issues and which drive his reality warping superpowers, and it's a huge mess. That was a bit that I'm glad Ultimatum got rid of. So X-Men as an allegory, it works in some cases, but you have to remember that this is an allegory for the struggle of another group of people created by the group of people that was initially oppressing them, and then is said to stand in for that struggle without the cultural history behind it, right? So if you want a really good X-Men civil rights allegory, put it in the hands of a bunch of black creators and see what happens. And I'm not qualified to speak on queer coding. You have queer people on the panel.
Before the next panel jumps in, it's 9:30. So
Yeah.
this is normally where a break between two panels will be. So what we do is continue on this topic, taking questions from this side of the room since they got kind of neglected, and then at 10 o'clock we can change to the topic. How's that sound?